everyone. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode number 289 of the Mailrite Real Estate Marketing Podcast. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Jonathan Denwood, and today we're going to be talking about three different topics, all of which we feel are very timely and very important. So topic number one is what to do and what not to do in terms of major marketing decisions in the middle of a super overheated real estate market. And number two, John and I are both going to take each of us. There is a lot of conversation in the digital space about basically consumer trackability, and it's hitting both Facebook and Google in different ways. Jonathan is going to share his viewpoints on the Facebook side, and I'm going to share my viewpoints on the Google side. We're really excited for the show today. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Jonathan, if you'd like to give some additional information about yourself, that would be great.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for joining us on the show. If you're new to the show, I'm the founder of Mailrite, founder and CEO. Mailrite is a platform that offers a number of digital tools in one package. We also utilize the power of Facebook to try, or we do, get you quality seller leads for your real estate business. Back over to you, Robert.
All right, lovely. And for those of you who don't already know me, and I think most of you do, but my name is Robert Newman. I am one of the only SEO experts in the country that focuses on real estate. And not only that, but I've been doing it for 14 years, which makes me one of the more seasoned voices that you can listen to in terms of things that are related to organic or inbound marketing. And I've been around long enough to have seen the last market heat up, which is going to be a nice segue into our first topic today, which is what to do and what not to do in the middle of just a crazy ass overheated market. So Jonathan, I'm curious to know, have you been having any of your sales conversations? Have any of the people that you've been talking to, have they started to tell you, oh, I only want to focus on seller leads?
All of them.
Okay. And I've been having the same experience. Every single realtor that's calling me right now is saying, oh, focus on sales, like focus on seller lead, focus on seller leads. And here's the thing. If you're talking to a guy like John, who is doing Facebook marketing and theoretically has an avenue or a channel that he can follow that might get you in front of a seller that is a direct advertising solution, that is certainly something that you could and should do. Okay. If you're going to go
not really, Robert, because
no?
It's going to be a bit shorter than maybe using organic search or content management, whatever you want to call it. But it's still going to, you might be lucky. Some of those people that come into that funnel through Facebook advertisement might be there ready to trigger, but they might be more normally, a lot of them, it's going to be like 2 months, 3 months, 4 months out, so it's going to be shorter, but in some ways it's the same problem, isn't it? If you want seller leads right now, those seller leads will only come from the marketing activity that you've done like 3 months ago.
Sure. Okay, well, that's a different perspective. That's not what I was expecting you to say. So you wouldn't necessarily do seller leads if you're focused on Facebook marketing right now? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
We are, but they do generate some right now. But I think that this whole business about using, direct market, paid advertising, I think in this particular industry at this particular moment, I think saying that it's going to get people to do what it normally does to the extent that it normally does would be a false sell.
A false sale. Okay. All right. Well, I would agree with that.
To some extent, because this market is so crazy at the present moment, so overheated, So in many areas, not all areas of America, but in many areas, it has got to the level of total madness that what would normally apply, I think at the present moment, no longer applies.
I would agree with that. So, ladies and gentlemen, what my experience has been, and I manage a very large catalog of real estate websites, probably over maybe between 100 and 150 at this point. And I'm looking at these sites most of the time. And the traffic patterns are crazy because of COVID. And what I mean by that is that month to month, you've got different things happening on the sites. And that's very unusual. You always have seasonal elements that affect real estate websites and traffic, which in turn affects conversion on websites. Like, what do I mean by seasonal elements? Well, half my client base is in very cold parts of the US for half the year, such as anywhere in the East Coast or the South. So when it gets freezing cold outside, appointments and traffic goes up, but appointments go down, which is a weird thing. Summer comes and appointments go up, but the traffic on the site comes down because people aren't stuck in the house. And I've lived on the East Coast, so I know what that's like. For those of you who are listening to the show that are like in New York or Boston, what happens during the first sunny warm day of the year? Because you all know it. Everybody gets out of the office building, takes long lunches or takes the day off and goes out and enjoys the day. That's what happens in those cities. Nobody is sitting inside their office and on their computers anymore. They're all outside enjoying the nice weather. And that's pretty typical of real estate and real estate traffic on real estate websites. And that, of course, as professionals who are doing marketing, that affects all of us. Well, guess what? Right now, what I'm seeing across all 150 sites is, for some reason this month, traffic is wildly depressed, which probably has a lot to do with the vaccination rates in the US and people finally being able to get out of the house and socialize. So there's that factor. There's also the factor of, for every single house that I have in almost every single market, they're getting 5-10 offers on every single property. And so you've got such a high level of competition for each and every single property. There's a lot of people just getting frustrated and giving up. Additionally, you as a real estate agent are probably feeling like, oh my God, the competition is so high. It's so much hard work to get a buyer accepted to a house. It's a crazy amount of work right now for leads.
And I just want to slightly interrupt, because I didn't there was part of this market I didn't understand, Robert, but I listened to a few resources and now I think I've got a better understanding. I couldn't understand how people could like offer 20, 30, 40,000 over the asking price, because I know for a fact that the lending standards for average people haven't been reduced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it could be. But then I found out institutional buyers have entered the market again, that there's group where they can, and these institutional either funds purposely developed to buy domestic property, or funds, various different funds, and they have the opportunity to borrow money at rates that the average person wouldn't be able to borrow or have access to finance. And I understand they've been entering the market because even though normally they wouldn't enter a market like this because they're bottom feeders, but the money's so cheap, and the stock market is so inflated that they have actually entered even this market that is red hot. They've still entered it to some degree. How truthful that is, I don't know, but that's what I've been hearing, Robert.
Okay. And that's certainly another perspective, but I'm gonna take it back and just remind everybody what we're talking about, which is decisions you should and should not make inside of an overheated market. So what John and I are describing is strange traffic patterns, okay? Unusual circumstances where even financial and institutional people are entering a market. Overheated actions inside your local marketplaces. For all those people listening to the show, most of you are going to be nodding your heads along with this, going, oh yeah, we're seeing that. So what shouldn't you do in terms of your marketing? John is saying, hey, things are slow to difficult with the direct marketing side. And I'm here to tell you that I'm turning away most of the campaigns that come to me that are talking about seller only leads, not because we can't do a campaign, but because SEO is a slow build, and it's going to take 6 to 12 months. Now, we could do PPC, we could do direct marketing into really good content on the site. The challenge that you're going to have is that everybody and their brother right now is fishing around for these seller leads. And of course they exist and you can get them. But in terms of making long-term decisions, in my opinion, right now is probably the last moment that you want to be looking at your long-term marketing decisions. The market is just simply too unpredictable. We're using other language, but we're saying it's hot, we're saying it's this. You know what, when you're going to make a decision that's going to last you 3 years or 2 years, by 2 years from now, we're probably going to be in a wildly different real estate marketplace. I mean, dramatically different, 50 to 100%. Well, yeah, like a huge percentage different. Would you agree with that, John?
Well, the difficult thing, and we've discussed this, is that it's been controlled by forces outside normal economical patterns. This has become a political, quasi-economical issue, which which is being controlled by the Fed and by federal government, isn't it? Biden has introduced, I understand he's talking about putting in a bar for repossession for until next year. Then there's the amount of liquidity that's been pumped into the national system, which is sizable. These are all factors that are kind of outside the norm, aren't they, Robert?
These factors are highly outside the norm. So, ladies and gentlemen, like I am loving. I don't want anybody to miscollect. Right now is for me and the people that I'm talking to, is a perfect time to make for me in the SEO business, it's a perfect time to make a long-term decision, because while the market won't be stabilized today, by the time SEO and like a properly optimized site is kicking in, the chances are like supremely high that at that moment the market would stabilize. And because everything is so uncertain, and you'd have a hard time, like when somebody calls me and says, well, where should I park my money? And I do get that question a lot from very big agents and very big brokers. Like, where do I go with my money? I'm usually going to, I've been scratching my head and going, well, I don't like any of the major services right now. I don't like Zillow. I don't like, the best thing that so the best thing that you could do is stay away. Like all these guys these marketing companies are getting an additional budget from their biggest clients. They're getting more and more money from people as they try to keep their numbers high in this overheated market, because they have the budget to do so. And the smaller guy is getting squeezed because he can't keep up with these really big spenders. He just can't. So you're up against all these people with bigger pocketbooks in every single market that you're looking at. So what do? There aren't that many great choices, and this sounds like a shameless plug, but you either find small operators like me and John that can pay a lot more personal attention. And by the way, I want to be clear, I'm not promising that even that is a perfect strategy. We were not magic workers. What you don't want to do is give an unlimited budget to people that have your marketing campaign on autopilot, in my opinion. That will not be, you will see a highly diminished return on your money, in my opinion. Go ahead,
we are having to spend more time. We do. I wouldn't say none of our campaigns on an automatic. We twig them for the agent. We have a library of different campaigns that normally work, but in this particular environment, if they're really insisting, we're having to spend more time on individual campaigns that might appeal to their local market, and spend a bit more time on those campaigns. It's just that because we're in such an unusual scenario, aren't we? Going to repeat myself. This is a crazy market. This has gone beyond. Really, this has gone beyond what we saw in 205 up to 207.
Right. So I want to wrap up this part of the podcast and move on to our other topics, because I feel like it's going to take us a while to discuss this stuff. But here's where I fall, ladies and gentlemen. John can weigh in if he thinks I get any of this wrong. But for me personally, I would say for all of those people that are already involved in marketing agreements, now is the time to call your provider and double check the details of these agreements. Make sure that your budget is being spent wisely. Make sure that you are not over investing in diminished returns. Make sure that if you are investing your money someplace, that maybe you have a strategy in place. Like, you might not be getting a lot of conversion right now, as an example, but maybe like in terms of ROI, but maybe you've got something in place that is collecting you a lot of names and numbers. Well, that is gonna pay you for sure at some point.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that what you're doing is you're looking at your second and third tier marketing efforts, such as your email campaigns, and are you nurturing these leads the right way? So that would be what I would be doing in today's market. I would be checking my agreement, looking at everything twice, making sure that my nurturing systems were in place, because you may not be getting calls no matter what you do right now. It may not be possible in the market that you're in. I have clients like that, no matter what you're doing.
It's just to finish off, because we need to go. I totally agree with what you just said, but we've got to be realistic here. It swings and roundabouts. Yeah, you're going to get less commission checks, but those commission checks that you do get are going to be nice.
Right.
You can't expect the volume in what we're seeing at the present moment, because there just isn't the homes on the market. A lot of people, because they don't want people looking around their house that might have the virus, and also they think, well, if we sell this house, where are we going to move? They're the two fundamental things that are stopping people, and the new home production has ceased. They can't get raw materials, so new housing has stopped basically in many areas, and so all that demand has gone into the secondary market. Well, it's on fire, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are John and I's thoughts about making marketing decisions inside an overheated market. We're going to go to our break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss the recent changes in privacy laws as it relates to cookies, and the way that both Facebook and Google collect data, which, by the way, is going to affect digital, in my opinion. And John and I are going to discuss from each of our ends about, because he focuses on Facebook and I focus on Google. So we're each going to talk about our end of that. So stay tuned. We're looking forward to we're looking forward to talking to you at the second half of the show. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are enjoying the MailRight podcast, which it talks about real estate marketing. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Jonathan Dinwood, and the second part of our show is going to be dedicated to discussing the recent changes in privacy laws as it relates to both Facebook and Google. So, John, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, it's just that, OS 14 for the iPhone, the iPad, and has come out, in that Apple have decided that they're going to put pop-ups, when you're utilizing the Facebook app, other like Instagram, everything that Facebook owns. They're putting up warning messages, and you have to go into the settings of your phone and activate elements that would allow Facebook to retrieve data, which they need to be able to have their marketing platform be effective. So it's a knife straight at the heart of Facebook. Seemingly Tim and Mark had some conversations at the end of last year, which didn't go that well. They refute that it was a personal bust up. Other people in the know say that there is personal animosity between Tim and Mark. I know this is ridiculous because we're talking about two enormous organizations, but business is always about emotion and personality. But what's driving that essence, that conflict, is basically Apple has a certain attitude towards private information, and Facebook has a certain attitude that's been driven by Mark. I don't think Facebook have responded to this very well. I think they should have been a bit more laid back about it and just pointed out to people that when they had support tickets and people complaining, saying, well, it's Apple doing this, you need to go in and change these settings. The whole question about what data Facebook is collecting, and that, to me, is extremely interesting. But I think for the majority of people that use Facebook, they're extremely blasé, and I'm saying this as somebody that markets Facebook, but I think most people's attitude towards what Facebook is connecting is rather blasé. But on the other hand, I have a blasé attitude towards it, but it's based on something I think is probably a little bit more unique. I actually consider the American government is already collecting all this data in the background anyway. What a private company like Facebook does is nothing compared to what the American security services are doing, which Snowden pointed out. And the American people have been very blasé about what Snowden basically told us, that the American government is collecting everything we do online and storing it and keeping it. So I'm not that worried what a private company like Facebook is doing, Robert.
Okay. Well, all right. I think that the more you know about like online and the way that people collect information, the more that you understand, it's a double-edged sword. So for every single person listening to this show, you're probably a working real estate professional, and many of you, like myself, probably don't really like the idea or appreciate the idea of your personal information being tracked and collected, but we all accept it, especially if you're a real estate agent, because your name and your phone number are out there so many damn different times. You have little choice but to accept the fact that you could be scooped up and scraped. And every single realtor I talk to is saying that they're getting 20, 30 offers a day from people, emails, text messages, phone calls. I believe it because your information in most cases is public. And so you got to, and in many cases, you survive on your information being public. So we all consider these collection of information to be a necessary evil. In my opinion, in terms of the necessary evils, I think that coming from a top-down way, I think that Mark Zuckerberg is willing to go farther than most business owners in collecting data. Does that make me feel comfortable as an individual? No. Does it distress me higher or lower? Not really. I prefer Google. I prefer their collection policies. But is that to say that they are not collecting data? Of course they're collecting data. They're just not quite as egregious about it as Facebook is.
I think you've put that really well, actually. I think Mark is his worst enemy. He's not somebody that I personally am attracted to. what, I have no personal contact with the person. I actually do know some people that have actually met him and actually have worked underneath him in reasonably senior positions. And what they've told me in private is not that attractive, Robert.
Sure. And I've been in the tech industry long enough and had similar experiences, people that I know, and in the messaging that I get is that this is not necessarily human that shares the quality traits of people that I respect and admire. And I am doing my best, because both we're online and because everybody deserves their own fair shake, in my opinion. And I've never met the man personally. I will say that when I look at his business decisions and his long track record of public stuff, I'm not in admiration of most of these decisions. I don't like the way that Facebook was started. I don't think it was ethical. I wouldn't have done it the same way. But you know what? He's made billions of dollars and he's been super successful. And here's what's more important to all of us listening to the show. I don't think that you care or if I get on a soapbox or not. I do think that what the commentary is about the tool is that since Facebook was so effective at collecting so much information, if at each time that they get their hands slapped by organizations that slap hands, I think it's more impactful than other types of advertising, because they did collect so much data and they did get so good at separating the audiences, and they're looking at all sorts of things that like audience categories has already been impacted. Like, are you a young woman over the age of 15, whatever it is. Like, there's so many different variations of data that they collected that if you are an advertiser, Facebook has been somewhat of a dream, because you could target your exact audience almost down to a finite detail because of Facebook's super aggressive information collection policies. And as a marketer, that's got to be very attractive, because you can target your audience so definitively. But each time they have to change their rules, their targeting becomes a little broader. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, they've been forced down there, haven't they?
Right.
Screaming and then kicking down there.
Right, which just probably means that people who are using Facebook are going to have to be more creative as advertisers, get more into the commercial building business than just the straight up targeting business. And what do I mean by that? You have to get a little more clever about your advertisements and things like of that nature. Become more involved in like a catchy ad, because you're going to be appealing to a broader audience. So the only way to define the audience is to do what TV's been doing for so long, which is creating really good, broader messages that subtly appeal to the audience that they want. Now, the problem is creating these messages tends to take more time and effort, and that means more cost to advertisers. But that really digital is just being backed off. Go ahead. Oh, you're not raising your hand? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just scratching it. Sorry.
Oh, my bad. What were you going to say, though?
It's a two-edged sword. I think, surprisingly, you can still have. We encourage, especially the wording is. There's certain adverts that still work around a property that comes on the market, which will appeal, that will get people's interest about supplying the right level of info in the advert, but not all the info, because why then would they be moving to a landing page? They're still very effective, but a lot of people don't have a lot of property at the present moment, so that's why you've got to get a bit more creative. I'm a big mover towards video, but a lot of agents don't like making videos. Well, those that are prepared to work with us and do some video and be part of the Facebook advert and of the landing page, they're getting much better results in this type of market at the present moment, Robert. So, but there's not much Facebook can do. The only good thing about Facebook is I think the majority of people that are using Facebook, and especially Instagram, because that's still growing. You know, that is just a juggernaut that's still growing. The growth in Facebook itself has slowed, but Instagram is just a juggernaut. And what Apple is doing, I think to those that people like me, it's really interesting. But I think for the bulk of people that are using Facebook, I just don't think they're that interested, really.
Well, I think that's true too, and we can definitely delve a little bit deeper into that. But Google is also facing its own set of privacy issues right now. How close are we to the 30-minute mark, John? John, how close are we to the 30-minute mark?
Yeah, we're getting close to it, so we really need to wrap up and maybe have some bonus content, Robert.
Right. Let's do 10 minutes of bonus content, and I'll talk a little bit about Google. Okay. We'll go from there. So for those of you who've been tuning into the podcast, listen, John and I are just two little entrepreneurs, two independent guys, and we do our best to provide as much valuable information as we can. But you know what? Always we're asking for this, and I'm gonna make this appeal again. If any of you have some thoughts about show topics that you'd like us to do, either you can tune into the live or find some of our shows on our Facebook pages. Really just drop us a comment on any public channel, and John and I are both wildly findable. You can find him on the MailRight website. You can find me on the Inbound REM website. And if all you want to do is say to either one of us, hey, I listened to your podcast and I would love to hear you guys talk about this. I know I would be very open to that. I suspect that John would be too. And neither one of us will hound you for any kind of marketing service. We just want to try to make the show better for the people listening to it. So thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. My amazing co-host, I'm going to let him give his contact information for anybody that wants to chase him down and talk about Facebook. I strongly recommend for those listening that you do consider a consultation. I'm not even necessarily going to tell you that I'm going to recommend that now is the time to pull the trigger, but you really should be talking to people that have a good understanding. John is an excellent resource, and I recommend him strongly if you can get him on the phone. So John, go ahead and say.
I recommend you as well, Robert. But I think this is the time. I think this is time to be talking to people. And if you've got the budget to start off your working with a particular vendor like Robert or myself, it's a great time, because those that sow the seeds in the next 4 or 5 months are going to get a fantastic return. I agree with what you just said. If you're with a present vendor and you're spending quite a bit of money, this is the time to really talk to the provider and see how that money's been spent. I think you've got to be realistic. Whoever you're spending your money with, this is a really unusual market. And you've got to be realistic, but on the same time, this is, as long as you've been reasonably effective before this crazy market, you should still be doing reasonably well. This is not the time to start jumping ship and start running around in a panic. This is a time to make sure that your systems, the way you look after your clientele, the way you keep in contact with your clientele is the best that you can provide, isn't it? It's not a time to be running around like a headless chicken, is it, Robert?
Yeah, I agree with that. So John and I would love to have that conversation with you, ladies and gentlemen. I would also offer up my time and try to give the best advice I can. I am a cautious marketer. Like, well, believe it or not, I don't go overboard with my recommendations to people, even when it's them using other services and when it's using my services. It is a very significant thing to make large commitments to marketing companies. We have to be sure about what we're doing and when we're doing it and what the timing is and where the budget is going and what the predicted ROI is and all those different things. So by all means, leverage either one of us to have those conversations. You can do so with me at inboundrem.com, and you can just go to my contact form, and I usually respond within 3 or 4 hours. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in. For those of you who are interested, please stay with us. I'm going to talk a little bit about Google in the last 10 minutes. The bonus content will be on the Mail-Right YouTube channel. Okay, and of course, if you're tuned into Facebook or whatever, you can find it on both of our Facebook pages. Thank you for spending some time with us. We appreciate it. 3, 2, 1. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back with the bonus version of episode number 289 of the Mail-Right, I'm going to say podcast, but in this case, we're going to be looking at you face to face via video. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the Google has also been facing its fair share of privacy issues in terms of cookies. That's where it's coming out with Google. When and how can they track? Now, Google is actually not using cookies in the way that most people think they are. So it's not exactly the devil of a problem that people think it is. Now, Google does use cookies for Google Analytics and other tools that they have. So it's not to say that it's not a problem, but for a very long time, they've been using a different type of browser tracking that comes off Chrome, and they collect a lot of their data straight up off your browser. Now, it could be called a cookie that they have in the browser. You could maybe call the technology that, but Google to change the language and use a different type of technology in order to get the same kind of data, it's a much smaller step for them. They actually are very close to it already, which is part of what they have done, according to John, as I haven't really been keeping up with this, but you told me pre-show that they've kicked over 2 or 3 proposals to the government. Is that right?
Well, the fundamental thing, like what you said about Chrome, it's not a pixel, but in some ways they know even more than Facebook because they're using the IP address. They know where you are. But the strange thing, Robert, is you could really criticize Apple because the iPhone or any mobile phone, it knows precisely where. If you're next to your iPhone or your Android device, they know where you are. So in some ways, Facebook can't do that. They don't know where you are right now. But Apple and the mobile provider does, but so does Google through Chrome. Well, if you're viewing something, they've got your IP address. If they've got their IP address, they can work out where you are.
Right. Yes, and all of that is true. So it isn't really that big of a leap to say that. And by the way, for those of you listening to the show, Google holds a ridiculous amount of technology patents that have to do with defining who we are via the web. And saying that their only method is cookies is laughable. They also have a branding logarithm, which literally tracks how many times that you're being mentioned on certain social platforms, and then makes educated guesses as to your popularity and influence based on signals that they're picking up on these social sites. And some of those signals are entry and exit points off Chrome because all of Facebook's tools do not allow Google to read them. That's a significant number of tools. So Instagram and Facebook both are not allowing Google to crawl their pages. So these two wildly influential social media services, in theory, are not providing any kind of relevant data to Google. In addition, Twitter is not all that friendly to Google. So now you start wondering to yourself, how is Google actually seeing all this data? Well, here's what they're doing. They're measuring entry and exit data points off their browser, because you go to Twitter, you go to Instagram via a browser, and they can see how many pages you look at and how long you spend on the site, and just all sorts of other data is collected through the browser, which is not necessarily a kind of technology that is the same as saying cookies. So in terms of who is set up better in an information kind of privacy war, there is no doubt to me that the company that is set up 10 times better is Google. They can probably propose 5 or 6 different ways to skirt privacy laws, because they're well ahead of that conversation. They've already been trying to back off cookie technology previous to this. They didn't have to have the government tell them that they should probably be not egregiously using cookies. They've been working on this technology, like various technologies that would remove the need for cookies for a long time. So they're well positioned to offer up a number of solutions. Now, does that mean ultimately that the privacy conversation won't affect them? No, it doesn't. It means that their algorithm can get a little murkier in the way that they serve up traffic. But with all the different branding signals that they have available to them, and how much data that they've managed to compile, and how close they are, because they already have autonomous learning also. Well ahead.
Aren't they? But to the gist of it, aren't they proposing this? They're proposing they got all this data about you, but what they're saying is we're going to put you in a bucket of other people, and we're going to have these buckets of these different groups of individuals, and then we're going to suck out the data about the group, and we're going to sell that to our advertisers, but we're not going to sell the data about you individually to those advertisers. I think, is that the gist of what they're trying? And and this is only my personal opinion, Robert, I feel that is very I'm struggling for the right word, in murky, or I'm really struggling to find the right words here, Robert.
Well, okay. I'm not going to help out with the right words. These buckets of people and things like that. It's really, here's the thing. Google is a multi-billion-dollar company, and just like Facebook, they're trying to get around the law. That's the truth. I'm not trying to say that Google is really addressing this ethically. They're as dependent on clear user data as Facebook is, if not more so. And so their proposals are really proposals, in my opinion, that are directed to non-technology people. And they're very cleverly framing, like you're talking about buckets of groups. Well, guess what? Google already has collected enough information in the past that they can intuit deeply, like this bucket thing. It's calling it like a dog by another name. It's just them confusing a complex issue for people that don't understand technology. That's all
Exactly.
it is.
To me, it's exactly what the mobile phone companies, the main carriers, said about the government's collection. Their argument is that we supply the raw data, but it doesn't identify the individual. It's the same and it's well known that is a frivolous avoidance argument, that the actual government's technology easily overcomes and does identify individuals. And it's the same argument that Google is trying to play. And to me, it's just a game, Robert.
Yeah, and it is a game, and it's a game that all big companies and the government are going to play with each other. And that's the funny thing. It's a lot of like huff and puff about nothing. The people in government that are trying to basically monitor Google, like, one can argue that you'd think that they'd have the capability to do that because of the NSA or whatever it is. But if you understand tech, that's just not true, because the NSA is focused on surveillance technology, and they are very invasive, and that's surveillance. So if we're talking surveillance, the NSA could do some pretty incredible things. But if we're talking about trying to understand where Google has all of their fingers into, Google probably employs close to 900% more scientists than the actual government does. That's the thing about being a big company with the kind of pockets that Google actually has. At one point, you outmatch the government in terms of your ability to build like ideas and technology. And Google has much more revenue and finances in the categories it's focused on than the government does to monitor them or figure them out. And you'd have to have some really smart people on the government side trying to limit or adapt the technology. And the problem with the government is that the way that this stuff is getting dictated is by Congress people, and Congress people don't fucking understand technology to save their life. Sorry about the curse. They don't get it. They oftentimes are reading off Cliff Notes where their assistants, their pages and things like that, who are in their 20s, have had to explain to them what even Facebook privacy issue is about. They don't know. There's like 3 people in the House.
I just want to, the reason why it should be of interest to you, real estate agent that's listening to this, and I'm sure you're listening because you love our little discussions, is that there's a bit of a game being played here, and where it's going to end up and how it's going to affect the effectiveness of digital marketing. Me and Robert don't know, but the only thing I would remark about what you've just said, Robert, is that and this is only my personal position on this, Robert, is this relationship between the American government and Google, where the boundaries are, how much they exchange, because you are right, the amount of scientists and the amount of money that Google has to throw at these type of problems compared to some of the other players, including the American government, is considerable. But what I would say to you is that Google makes out that the American government has done things which it's not been happy with. I am always suspicious about this relationship between Google and government, and specifically the American government, because I feel that this relationship is multifaceted and changing and always moving. And I feel that the things that Google have been allowed to do, they've been allowed to do because they have a very multi-complex relationship with the American government, Robert.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I wouldn't disagree with that. But anyway, I've shared my thoughts on privacy. We've hit the 1 o'clock mark.
Yeah.
And for those of you who've tuned into the YouTube portion of the show, my personal thank you. I'm sure that John would join me in that. And we deeply appreciate you tuning in and listening to us drone on about these things. I assume that you are receiving value from the fact that we do so. And if you are, since you're going to be on the MailRight YouTube channel when you're watching this, do John a favor and give it, well, me too, give a thumbs up, give a comment on the video. We would really appreciate it.
We will. We'll see you next week, folks. Bye.
Bye.